January 24th, 41 AD. The Palatine Hill, Rome. Emperor Caligula walks through an underground passage beneath the palace. He's returning from the theater. 4 years into his reign, 4 years that would become legend. Then blades in the darkness. The Taurian guard sworn to protect him cuts him down. His wife, his infant daughter, all murdered within minutes. Within decades, historians would write that he deserved it, that he was insane, depraved, a monster. They would say he made his horse a senator, that he turned the palace into a brothel, that he declared himself a living god. But here's what those ancient sources don't tell you. They were written by his enemies, men who wanted to justify his assassination, men with every reason to lie. So tonight, we're asking a different question. What if everything you know about Caligula is wrong? Or worse, what if some of it is true and there's a reason no one talks about why? We're going deep into one of history's most controversial figures, separating propaganda from reality, examining the evidence, and discovering that the truth might be stranger and darker than the legend. This video contains historical accounts of violence, sexual content, and political assassination. All claims are sourced from ancient historians and modern scholarship. Before he was Caligula the Mad, he was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, a child growing up in Roman military camps. The soldiers gave him his nickname, Caligula, Little Boots, because he wore tiny soldiers' boots around camp. His lineage was impeccable. Great-grandson of Emperor Augustus, grandson of the legendary General Germanicus, son of Agrippina the Elder, one of Rome's most respected women. He should have been untouchable. Instead, he watched his family destroyed by paranoia. His father, Germanicus, possibly poisoned 19 AD. His mother, Agrena, starved to death in exile, 33 AD. His 2 older brothers executed on false charges. By age 18, Caligula was the last male heir standing, and he'd learned a critical lesson. In Rome, even innocence wasn't protection. Only power mattered. Emperor Tiberius, the man many blamed for his family's death, summoned him to Capri. For 6 years, Caligula lived there, watching, learning, surviving. Ancient sources say he was a master of disguising his true feelings. He had to be. One wrong word could mean death. When Tiberius died in March 37 AD, 24-year-old Caligula became emperor. Rome exploded in celebration. The Senate decreed Thanksgiving. Citizens poured into the streets. They'd hated Tiberius's paranoid tyranny. They saw Caligula as a fresh start. Young, connected to the beloved Germanicus, representing hope. And for the first 6 months, he seemed to deliver. Released political prisoners, ended treason trials, reduced taxes, put on spectacular public gains, showed generosity to the people. The historian Philo wrote that these were the happiest 7 months the Roman world had ever known. Then in October 37 AD, Caligula fell desperately ill. Modern historians debate what happened. Meningitis, epilepsy, poisoning attempt. We don't know. What we do know, when he recovered, something had changed. Let's start with the most famous story, the one that makes Caligula seem completely insane. Incitatus, his beloved horse. According to the ancient historians Suetonius and Cassius Dio, Caligula didn't just love this horse, he made it a senator. The story goes, Incitatus received a marble stall, an ivory manger, purple blankets, and a jeweled collar. Caligula planned to make him a consul, the highest office in Rome before assassination prevented it. Here's the problem. This story appears in sources written 80+ years after Caligula's death. No contemporary accounts mention it. So, what actually happened? Archaeological evidence confirms Caligula did build extremely lavish stables. We have the remains. He absolutely spent enormous amounts on his horses. He was passionate about chariot racing. But here's the alternative interpretation that modern historians propose. What if the horse senator story wasn't about insanity, but about contempt? Imagine you're Caligula. You've watched the Senate collaborate in destroying your family. These same senators who now flatter you ordered your mother starved, your brothers executed. Some historians believe the horse senator threat was deliberate mockery. You senators are so useless, so corrupt that my horse could do your job. Cassius Dio himself notes that Caligula used to say he would make Incitus a consul, not that he actually did it. The threat alone would have been devastating. A public statement that the Senate had become so degraded that a horse was their equal, and they couldn't respond. Challenging the emperor meant death. So they had to sit there absorbing the insult, their powerlessness on full display. After his assassination, those same senators told the story differently. Not Caligula mocked us, but Caligula was insane. He thought a horse could be senator. One interpretation makes them look weak. The other makes him look crazy. Guess which version they wrote down? The truth. We don't know for certain. Maybe he was mocking them. Maybe he really was delusional. Maybe it's some of both. This pattern, where we can't separate fact from propaganda, repeats throughout Caligula's story. Here's something we can verify from multiple sources. Caligula absolutely did declare himself a living god. This isn't propaganda. This is documented fact. He extended the temple of Cast and Poc into the palace, literally making the palace part of a temple with himself as the deity. He erected a full-scale golden statue of himself in the temple, dressed in whatever costume he wore each day. Sometimes as Jupiter, sometimes as Neptune, sometimes as other gods. Citizens were required to offer sacrifices to his statue, to worship him as they would Jupiter or Apollo. This is confirmed by multiple sources, including Foe of Alexandria, who was a contemporary and actually visited Rome during Caligula's reign. Now, context matters here. Romans had a complicated relationship with divine rulers. Julius Caesar was deified after death. Augustus allowed worship in provinces, not Rome. Eastern provinces had long traditions of living god kings. In Egypt and the East, rulers being gods was normal. In traditional Roman culture, it was blasphemy. But here's what made Caligula different. He demanded worship as a living god in Rome itself, not after death, not in distant provinces, right there in the capital, where it violated centuries of tradition. And he used this divine status strategically. Rich Romans were summoned to fund his temples. Refusing meant insulting a god, punishable by death. Political opponents could be executed for impiety toward the divine emperor. Most dangerously, he ordered a statue of himself placed in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Foe led a Jewish delegation to plead with him. His account survives. It describes Caligula. He would not even let us finish our plea, but burst out laughing and said, "So you refuse to acknowledge me as a god?" Only his assassination prevented a catastrophic religious war. The statue was never installed. Modern historians debate his motivations. Theory 1, genuine delusion. Brain illness caused megalomania. Theory 2, political calculation. Divine status made him untouchable. Theory 3, testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push power. Evidence for mental illness. His behavior became erratic after his 37 AD illness. Ancient sources describe insomnia, paranoia, sudden rages. Some modern doctors diagnosed possible temporal lobe epilepsy. Evidence for political calculation. Divine status prevented Senate from challenging him legally. Funded massive building projects through temple donations. Created precedent later emperors would use. Most likely some combination. Perhaps illness affected his judgment, but he was clear-headed enough to exploit his divine status for political gain. When Caligula became emperor, he inherited one of the largest treasuries in history, 2.7 billion sesterces. That's equivalent to roughly $2 billion in modern money. Within 2 years, it was gone. How do you burn through that much money? Documented spending. The Nemi ships. Caligula built two massive floating palaces on Lake Nemi. Not ships for war or trade, palaces. When Mussolini drained the lake in the 1930s, they recovered the wrecks. The scale was staggering. Over 70 meters long, marble columns and mosaics running water and heating systems, essentially floating villas. Why? Because he could. The Bay Bridge. Caligula built a temporary bridge across the Bay of Bay, over 3 kilometers long, using ships lashed together as a platform. Cost astronomical purpose. He rode across it in triumph, wearing armor allegedly belonging to Alexander the Great. Just to prove wrong, an astrologer who said he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding across the Gulf of Bay on horseback palace expansions. He massively expanded the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. The remains are still visible today, sprawling additions that served no practical purpose beyond displaying wealth. Spectacular games. He put on games that made previous emperors look cheap, exotic animals from across the empire, elaborate naval battles and artificial lakes, gladiatorial contests lasting days, free food distributions. The people loved this. The treasury didn't. By late 39 AD, the money was gone. So Caligula found new revenue streams, forced inheritances. Rich Romans suddenly found themselves accused of treason, standard punishment, execution, and estate seizure. Ancient sources list examples. A man executed because Caligula wanted his house. Wealthy citizens pressured to name the emperor in their wills. Some allegedly forced to suicide after naming Caligula as heir. Creative taxation. Suetonius documents new taxes. Caligula imposed tax on prostitutes. This one was actually smart economically. Tax on food sold in markets. Tax on lawsuits and contracts. Tax on porters and laborers. Tax collectors were reportedly brutal. Citizens complained they couldn't afford the rates. Caligula's response, according to Suetonius: "Let them hate me so long as they fear me." Gladiator sales. He started selling condemned criminals to gladiator schools at inflated prices. He auctioned off palace furnishings from previous emperors. He allegedly even auctioned off sexual access to imperial family members at his parties. Though this claim comes only from hostile sources and is probably propaganda. Modern economic historians note that Caligula's spending wasn't just personal indulgence. It was politically calculated. Massive spending on games and buildings, employed thousands of workers, kept the populace entertained, demonstrated imperial power, funded political loyalty. The problem wasn't the spending itself. Augustus had spent similarly. The problem was speed and sustainability. Caligula spent in 2 years what Augustus spent over 40. By 40 AD, Rome faced a genuine fiscal crisis. The emperor's erratic behavior was destabilizing markets. Wealthy Romans were hiding assets. Tax revenue was dropping. The Roman Senate had been the heart of the Republic for centuries. Even under the empire, senators retained dignity, status, respect. Caligula systematically destroyed that. This is documented across multiple sources. These aren't propaganda. They're things senators themselves recorded happening. The running senators, Caligula, would force elderly senators to run alongside his chariot for miles in their togas. In the heat, some collapsed. Why? According to Suetonius, because he found it amusing. Senators as servants. At dinners, he'd make senators stand by his couch like slaves, serving him personally. Men who'd held consulships, the highest office, reduced to waiters. Public mockery. He publicly insulted senators' wives, sometimes propositioning them in front of their husbands. He forced senators to attend his parties, then humiliated them there. He invited them to watch executions of their colleagues. One famous incident, a senator fell asleep during one of Caligula's speeches. Caligula had him dragged out and beaten, then forced him to stand through the rest of the session. But the most dangerous humiliation targeted Cassius Chaerea, a senior Praetorian Guard officer. Chaerea was a military hero decorated in Germania, respected by his men. Caligula mocked him relentlessly for having a soft voice. When Chaerea asked for the watchword, The daily military password? Caligula would give him words like Priapus or Venus, sexual terms designed to humiliate him in front of his troops every day for months. A decorated soldier systematically humiliated by a 28-year-old emperor. Modern historians ask why. Theory 1, genuine sadism. He enjoyed cruelty. Theory 2, political strategy. Keep the Senate terrified and compliant. Theory 3, preventive. Humiliated men don't plot coups. Theory 4, testing loyalty. See who would endure anything. The Senate situation was impossible. If they resisted, execution for treason. If they complained, execution for disrespect to the emperor. If they plotted, execution before they could act. If they did nothing, endless humiliation. Previous emperors had wielded power carefully. Augustus maintained the fiction of senatorial dignity. Tiberius was paranoid, but mostly distant. Caligula wasn't just seizing power. He was rubbing their noses in their powerlessness. Foe of Alexandria, who witnessed some of this, wrote, "He treated the senators as if they were his personal property to be used or destroyed at his whim." But here's what historians debate. Was this madness or method? Evidence it was madness. No long-term political benefit. Created enemies needlessly, destabilized his own regime. Fits pattern of impulsive behavior. Evidence it was method. Augustus had warned the Senate will never willingly accept imperial rule. Breaking their spirit prevented organization against him. Terror was effective. No successful plots until the very end. He promoted loyal people to key positions while humiliating traditional elite. Most historians conclude probably both. Mental instability made him cruel, but he was clear-headed enough to recognize that cruelty kept him in power. The question isn't was he sane or calculating, but can you be both paranoid and strategically vicious? Historical accounts of incest and sexual violence. Viewer discretion advised. Now we reach the accusations that made Caligula infamous. The ones that seem too horrific to believe, and that's the problem. They might be too horrific to believe. The ancient sources claim Caligula committed incest with all three of his sisters, particularly with Drusilla, who he elevated to divine status after her death. They claim he hosted orgies in the palace that shocked even jaded Romans. They claim he forced senators' wives into sexual acts while their husbands watched. Here's what modern historians know for certain. Documented facts. Caligula did elevate his sister Drilla to unprecedented status. He did have her deified after death, something usually reserved for emperors. He did marry and divorce 3 times very quickly. He did host parties that contemporaries found shocking claims from hostile sources. Only the specific incest allegations appear only in Suetonius and Cassius Dio. Both wrote 608 years after the events. Both relied on earlier lost sources that may have been propaganda. No contemporary accounts confirm these stories. Here's what historians know about Roman political smears. Accusations of incest were standard propaganda against political enemies. Julius Caesar was accused falsely of affairs with multiple Menus' daughter. Julia was convicted of adultery as political punishment. Tiberius was accused of horrific sexual acts on Capri, probably exaggerated. Nero was accused of similar crimes to Caligula. The pattern destroyed an emperor's legacy by accusing him of the worst imaginable sexual crimes. Let's look specifically at the Drusilla situation. What we know, Caligula was extraordinarily close to his sister, Drusilla. He took her death so hard he fled Rome for months. He made it a capital crime to laugh or bathe during the mourning period. He named his daughter after her. Alternative interpretation. Maybe this was grief, not incest. Maybe a young man who'd watched his entire family murdered was devastated when his last close relative died. Maybe Roman culture had different boundaries around sibling affection than ours. Maybe deifying her was political, cementing his own divine status through family connection. Or maybe the accusations are true. We'll never know for certain. Modern scholarly consensus, probably some mix of fact and fiction, genuine inappropriate behavior, exaggerated into political propaganda. Dr. Alois Winterling, one of the leading Caligula scholars, argues, "We must read the sources critically. They had every reason to portray Caligula as a monster. Some accusations are likely true. Some are certainly false. We may never separate them completely." Similarly, the claim that he turned the palace into a brothel, evidence for multiple sources mention this. Caligula definitely hosted shocking parties. He did use sexuality as a political tool. Evidence against all detailed accounts come from hostile sources written decades later. No contemporary accounts confirm specifics. Similar accusations against other emperors turned out to be exaggerated. The claim serves the political purpose of justifying assassination. Why does this matter? Why can't we just say, yeah, he was a monster? Because if we don't question propaganda from the past, we won't recognize it in the present. Because character assassination through sexual accusations is still used politically today. Because the truth matters even about ancient emperors. What we can say with confidence. Caligula was sexually transgressive by Roman standards. He used sexuality to humiliate and control. He violated social norms deliberately. Whether the specific worst accusations are true remains unknown. January 2441 AD, 4 years into Caligula's reign. Cassius Chaerea, the guard officer Caligula had humiliated for months, leads a conspiracy. The plotters include multiple Taurian guard officers, several senators, palace officials, even some of Caligula's own staff. The plan: strike during the Palatine Games. Caligula will be in a theater on the Palatine Hill. He'll have to pass through an underground corridor to reach the palace. That's where they'll do it. The games proceed. Caligula watches from the imperial box. According to Josephus, who documented the assassination in detail, Caligula almost changed his plans multiple times. He considered staying to watch more performances. He thought about having lunch first. Friends urged him to leave while crowds were dense. Finally, he decides to return to the palace for a bath and a quick meal. He enters the underground passage. Chara strikes first, sword blow to the neck. Caligula falls, but he doesn't die immediately. Ancient sources say he tried to speak, tried to defend himself. The conspirators stabbed him 30 times to make sure. Then they went hunting. They found Sonia, Caligula's wife, in the palace, executed her. They found their infant daughter, Drusilla. A soldier smashed the baby's head against a wall. The Senate erupted in celebration. Some senators proposed abolishing the imperial system entirely. Returning to the Republic, but the Praetorian Guard found Claudius Caligula's uncle hiding behind a curtain in the palace. They declared him emperor. The Senate had no choice but to accept it. And then the story started. Senators who'd collaborated in murder needed justification. Palace officials who enabled him needed exoneration. The new emperor needed distance from his nephew. So they wrote, he was mad, depraved, inhuman, a monster. Some of it was true, some was exaggerated, some was outright fabrication. But they wrote it so well that for 2,000 years, people believed every word. So who was Caligula really? Here's what we know for certain. Documented facts. He declared himself a living god. He bankrupted Rome's treasury in 2 years. He systematically humiliated the Senate. He ruled through fear and unpredictability. He was assassinated by his own guards after 4 years. Unclear whether he was genuinely mentally ill or politically calculating. How much of his sexual transgression was fact versus propaganda? Whether specific famous stories like the horse senator or palace brothel are true, likely some combination of both illness and strategy. Real cruelty exaggerated by propaganda. A young man traumatized by watching his family destroyed who gained absolute power and used it absolutely. Compare Caligula to other young rulers with absolute power. Nero also inherited young, also became cruel, also ended in assassination. Commodus, similar trajectory. Early promised descent into cruelty assassination. Elagabalus sexual transgression, religious upheaval, murdered young. The pattern. Young men given unlimited power often spiral into cruelty and excess. The question is that because power corrupts or because Rome gave power to traumatized, unstable people and expected different results. What does Caligula teach us? Lesson 1. Question the narrative. Don't accept propaganda at face value. The winners write history. Always ask who benefits from this story. Lesson 2. Power without accountability. Absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it enables. Caligula could do anything because no institution could stop him. That's the real horror. Lesson 3. Trauma and power don't mix. A young man who watched his family destroyed for political reasons should never have been given unlimited authority. That's not a recipe for stability. In the end, we'll never fully know Caligula. Was he mad? Probably by modern standards. Was he evil? Probably by any standards. But was everything they said true? The ruins of his palace still stand on the Palatine Hill? You can visit them. The archaeological evidence shows genuine megalomania, massive construction, divine imagery, staggering expense, but it can't tell us what was in his mind. The story of Caligula reminds us that history is always more complex than legend. If this investigation into separating fact from propaganda interested you, subscribe to The Hollow Throne. We question historical narratives and examine the evidence behind the stories. What do you think? Was Caligula genuinely insane? A political genius using cruelty strategically? Or a traumatized young man with too much power? Leave your thoughts in the comments. One last thought. When they killed Caligula, they killed his infant daughter too. Smashed her head against a wall. She was completely innocent, but she was his blood, so she had to die. That tells you something about the kind of world Caligula lived in, and maybe why he became what he became. Sources and bibliography available in description. This video uses accounts from Suetonius, Cassius Dio, Josephus, Foe of Alexandria, and modern scholarly analysis. This has been The Hollow Throne, where we examine history's dark corners with honesty and evidence.